This is going to be a installation video for Profisee in the Azure environment. My name is Mark Biaggi. I'm with Biaggi Consultant. I started doing independent consulting back in September of 2022. I am a certified Profisee partner and been working with Profisee for just over 6 years and started with their version 6 on MDS. I've asked Tim Stalder to join me in this endeavor that we're on today, and he has just about 7 years of experience with Profisee. He's a certified Profisee consultant, and we're going to walk through this installation from start to finish. How you doing, Tim?
Good, yourself?
I'm great. I'm ready to go.
Good, let's do this.
So we have what we're going to do is we're going to start with the very, very beginning. And the very first thing you have to do is get a license from Profisee support. We all love contacting Profisee support. So we'll log into the support portal. Obviously, if you're going to install Profisee, you purchased it, you have the ability to log, you've gotten your login from your sales team, and now you need a license. And whether or not Profisee Sales provided it to you or not, this is how you're going to do it to get it from support directly. So you'll log in, you'll go to the support link, and you'll create a new case, and you'll type something like license, submit a ticket, select your entitlement, and you'll say that you have a license question. I always just leave. Do you ever change priority for your license, Tim?
Not for the license, no. They're actually really quick on returning licenses, so
Yeah. So
I've never had to change that priority.
pick your license, pick licensing for software version. You can put the version that you're going to get. And then what I like to put is I like to put license for, and then specifically what I am installing for. So if I'm installing for Azure PaaS, I want an Azure PaaS license, and then the version 23.2. If you're getting a PaaS, actually, no matter what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to provide the URL that you're going to use or the machine name. So if you're using the URL, maybe you put the URL that you want for your license file, and and then also you want to be able to provide whether or not it's production or non-prod or prod or non-prod, right? This ensures, so by saying that you want a PaaS license, ensures that you get the right license file. A PaaS license comes in a text file, whereas an IaaS license or a VM installation, that comes as a actual, what's the extension again? PLIC
Yeah.
file. PLIC
Or
file.
yeah. Yep. Yes.
And that is, they're both encrypted, but the PLIC file is what is used by the VM installation configuration manager. So you'll submit that. They, like Tim said, a couple, 3-4 hours, maybe something like that. They're really pretty quick about it, honestly. So you get that submitted. Then what you can do, what we are going to do is we're going to do an Azure AKS installation, PaaS. And so what we'll do is we'll go to github.com/Profisee. We'll click Kubernetes for a Kubernetes installation. There are several folder structures out here, and what we're going to need is our Azure ARM template. That's the easiest, most straightforward installation. We'll click that. and we'll scroll down. Here's all the prerequisites. You can read all of that information. Um, I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to show you how to do it. So we'll click the Deploy to Azure button. We'll log into our Azure subscription, and it'll pull up our custom deployment. This is where we're going to utilize our deployment configuration settings. So I have a deployment planning guide for each of the styles of implementation for Profisee. So if you're doing a private PaaS, I have a document that helps you track all the information you're going to need for your private PaaS installation. PaaS installation, IaaS installation, all of those different styles. I have a document that I provide to my clients so that we can document everything that's going to be needed for the installation before you get to doing it. If you do that pre-work, if you create the managed identity in advance, document what you're going to call all the different resources that are needed for the installation, then your installation is going to go a lot smoother and a lot faster, as you'll see here.
And that
So,
definitely helps too with, especially on the infrastructure side, if you're not the person who's managing your Azure environment. I think, some of the things that have been gotchas in my past is, there was a DNS needed that nobody knew about, or, there's a secret server password that had to be set up a certain way because the infrastructure team at the company I was installing it at wasn't included at the beginning. So that's very helpful.
oh, especially because a lot of the gotchas too is the managed identity wasn't set up correctly.
Right. Yep.
And then now, instead of you're done in 2 hours, you got to wait 2 days for the infrastructure
Or
team,
weak. Yeah.
or a week. Right. Yeah. And so by doing all this work in advance, now you're going to get it done a lot faster. So, yeah. So the first thing you have to do is you have to select the subscription. Mine's primary, and then you can select the resource group. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new one. The other advantage of this is we can just copy and paste. And I am going to use Central US region. And there's a reason why I absolutely have to pick Central US, and I'll explain it later. But right now, just know that I'm picking Central US. Then we're going to assign a managed identity. I actually already have the managed identity created, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll click next. Profisee version. Sorry. Use Key Vault. And the answer here is going to be yes. I've stored all my sensitive information in Key Vault, which makes it super simple to manage versions, especially when you're talking about Profisee licensing. Your Profisee license, you have to get a new license every year. And so by versioning your license in the Key Vault, it's very, very simple to, one, update your license, and two, when you need to upgrade in PaaS, it's also very simple. So we'll pick my Key Vault, which I also have documented here. I am going to use 23R1. And my first admin is going to be my email address. One thing that, and Tim, I don't know if you still do this with folks, but one thing I do with clients is I highly recommend using a service account as the first administrator.
Yes.
This ensures that if I leave, I'm not leaving the company, but if I left the company, right? If I left my own company, then all of the services that Profisee uses will still run because I'm not, you're using a service account rather than an individual's account.
Right. Yeah. And I've actually been at places where individual who has left the company was the first user. And there is a way to clean that up and add a service account back, but it is a lot of back end SQL Server work to make that change. So it definitely makes it easier if you have that service account up front, and when you're doing the installation. So
Yeah, I've had to do that. I've had to do that a few times myself. All right, so now the secret for the license file. One thing that's handy about having it documented here is that since I have to type it in here, rather than having to jump over to a new tab and start looking around, okay, what's my Profisee license file, license secret name? I already have it documented here, copy, paste, done. My web app. So this is actually critical for the type of installation that I am doing. Because I chose down the path down here, because I am going to choose to use the default Azure DNS with Let's Encrypt certificates. That this web app name is what is actually the very beginning of my URL. So in order to get my license file, I've provided them with this client-defined unique name, because what ends up happening is when I put in my client-defined unique name, Profisee installation will use this web app name as the beginning of my URL, and then it'll put the region and then .cloudapp.azure.com. And that is my URL that I have licensed to Profisee. Create a new Azure AD application registration. Let's see, did I already have that up here? The answer is yes, so we'll go ahead and have it create a new one. And we are not going to integrate with Preview, so we'll say no, not at this time. Click next. You know what? I'm going to call an audible and just use the regular cluster name. This is the default name. You can obviously change it. It will automatically populate these. We don't have to change these. This is actually new. When I first did this installation about a year ago, they didn't have the ability to use this Kubernetes RBAC. This will be interesting. So I feel like I want to use Azure. The next side is your Linux and your Windows node pools. So they've also increased this. Do you see this? So now they're setting these as 4 CPUs, 4 virtual CPUs for the Linux node.
yeah.
And they have 2 Linux nodes. That's interesting. This is new. And then now 8 CPUs with 32 gigabytes of RAM. I always take the defaults here. Just for a starting installation, I'll take the defaults. And then we're not going to do any advanced Kubernetes network settings, but if your organization has advanced settings, you can click yes and set up your virtual network and your subnets and that information. But for now, we're just going to do defaults. We're going to create a new SQL server. Call it this. And we already have our documented username from our key vault and our password. We're going to go ahead and leave the default database name, Profisee. And then we need to create a new storage account. Set there. Okay. Next. I don't know why they changed this too, and I don't agree with that. That can't be right.
Well, yeah, because you don't want everybody's environments underneath the prophecy.
No,
Well, yeah, that might
no,
just
it doesn't.
be
I think
verbiage.
I think that's just a terminology deal because you can't just have prophecy there for everybody. I
Although
believe,
maybe that's since that's in brackets, maybe that just means that if that's an example, probably.
yeah, I'll
But
be
yes, you
interested.
would.
My expectation, the way this used to work, is this would be end up being the web app name, so Biagi Consulting
Right.
dot centralus dot cloudapp.com dot azure.com/Biagi Consulting would be my expectation. Let's
Yeah,
find
I would.
out. See what this thing says here. Do the validation. I was wondering if that was going to happen because they increased the default cores. So I need to go back to Kubernetes here. They increased all the default cores, and my subscription doesn't have that many cores. So I'm going to drop the Linux cores down to 2, and I'm going to drop the VM cores down to 2 so that I can fit it into my tiny subscription.
I wonder if they did that for the latest version with the AI, the open AI stuff that they've added into it. So maybe that needs the more cores to be able to accommodate for that. But,
Well, the information that I always had was that Profisee Engineering just picked a low number, and they didn't
mm,
really have any rhyme nor reason for why they used it. The minimum cores for the Prophecy server has always been 8. And so it always
right.
struck me as odd that they ever had a default of 2 for the Prophecy server. Um, so I'm sure that's they figured out, oh yeah, okay, well, maybe OpenAI definitely needs more cores, that kind of a configuration. I am a little surprised that they bumped Linux up to 4 cores, um, because it was my understanding that Linux was just the. Oh, let me hit create here. We can get this thing running. It'll probably take like 45 minutes for this to run, and we
Right.
can we can have it running. Um, So the next thing, so while that runs, the next thing I want to do is go to github.com/prophecy again, go to the Kubernetes wiki, and we can come down here and verify deployment. Let's go ahead and duplicate this tab. And we can create actually, I'll just do it here. Create a cloud shell, and we'll run this. This is my resource group, which will be up here. There we go. Prophecy MDM and the AKS cluster name. Another good reason to document everything, not searching
Yeah,
around for. Okay, so it hasn't been created yet, so we'll let that run a little bit, and then once it's created, we'll be able to connect. All right, so we'll let that run. So what were we talking? Oh, so the Linux box cluster pod, whatever, um, is supposed to be for that traffic control, kind
Right.
of, you know, kind of, you know what? I have that diagram here. Here we go. So if you look at the way this is set up, you have your inside of your AKS cluster, your Kubernetes cluster, you have your load balancer, and that Linux node is your ingress. So it controls your traffic coming into Profisee. Then this is your Windows node that actually has the Profisee platform container that you get from the Profisee repository.
Right.
So that's why I'm a little shocked that this is a 4 cores on the installation. I would expect they don't really need more than 2 cores, but like you said, maybe that they're anticipating more traffic because of OpenAI.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting, but I mean, I think that I've learned to always go with their standards, especially when
Yeah,
it comes to t-shirt sizing, for your environment. So it's good to just follow along.
yeah.
So
Well, I agree. I mean, I've I've quite often what I'll do is when we first do the installation, I'll start with lower cores
right,
because especially with PaaS, with an on-prem or Azure VM, it's a little more difficult. But with PaaS, every little core counts as a cost, right? And
right,
the initial installation, you're not doing a lot of processing. You install it, you're configuring you're adding entities, you're doing some basic configuration. You don't really have any data there yet. So I'll go with a lower cores, and then once we start getting data in, then start increasing those cores because you're right. You're not going to be able to process anything and be happy with your performance unless you're meeting their minimum requirements.
right.
What's interesting about the minimum requirements is that it's flexible. Here, I'll show you. It's a wide range. So when we look at, I'll just pull this up here. When we look at the server requirements, you see we have 1 million rows or 5 million, right?
Yes,
So it's entirely possible that you have 1 million rows and you need 8 cores.
right. But
And
one
you can
thing that
also, uh-huh.
I was just going to say, one thing that businesses need to keep in mind that those number of records isn't just their data. It's the data inside of all of Prophecy and all of the tables driven by Prophecy and created by Prophecy. So you really have to kind of think outside the box when you do this calculation a little bit. So,
That's true. It counts golden records,
right,
all the master records created. Uh, in addition, you have to, if you're especially if you're using an like an Azure VM or an on-prem VM, it you have to consider what other processes that you have running on the server. If you
right,
have if you have antivirus and all these custom services that companies like to have on their servers, now you're taking up processing power. You're taking up RAM. And so
Right.
that also matters. I, I kind of think that it all depends on what you are actually experiencing. If you are
Yes.
experiencing slow performance and you have 4 million rows with 8 cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM, well, do you need more RAM? Really, and I don't know what your experience is, but my experience has been the RAM is used for matching indexing.
Yes. That's the resting usage. Yes.
Yeah.
What I've experienced and has been kind of interesting is, I worked on an entity where I have over 10 million, records inside of it. And, obviously the example here is 96 to 128. I tried it at the lower amount and it took forever. But then the resting index was around 56 gig.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was running it, I bumped it up to the 128 because of performance issues that I was seeing. And so, and when it's actually running, I was hitting about 126. I was using basically all the RAM
Yeah.
just for that. And then the rest, at the resting stage of that index, it's about 56. So, there are things that I read and I've seen and I've heard to where, well, what will be your final index size and base your RAM off of that? And I kind of disagree with that a little bit. I think you really have to, like you said, manipulate it based on your performance needs and how how much you're willing to wait for that initial process type of thing. So,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, because I've had clients that they want real time,
mhm.
and if you want that real time integration, you want that performance for real time, you need more power on the server. And I get a
Yes,
lot of clients that say, well, we're not using all the cores. You know, the performance monitor doesn't show we're using all the cores. So why do I need more cores? Why do I need, more RAM if I'm not, sitting there and idle at more RAM? Well, because like what you just said, when Prophecy actually starts processing, it's going to ramp up that RAM usage.
right.
Now, when Prophecy, I'm curious of what'll happen when Prophecy moves to SQL index, SQL
Right.
matching. It's all in the graph database
Yeah, that
because
will definitely be
yeah,
interesting to see how that works out.
yeah, because ultimately what's going to happen is now the RAM won't be stored in the on the server itself. Sorry, the index won't be stored on the server itself, and so you won't lose your index if you have to reboot your server for maintenance, upgrade, whatever. Um, and so now you will always keep that index. You don't have to completely rebuild it when that server is rebooted or the service is stopped, right? So you save
Have you
RAM on the server, you just have to spend more storage on SQL.
have you heard any scenarios of what that benefit is of moving that index to those graph tables other than speed and the storage? But would you be able to actually manipulate that index inside of the graph table? Because if because I've had scenarios where it's like, oh, rather than rebuilding the whole matching strategy, it sure be nice to just take a chunk out of it and put it somewhere else. So,
So I know you've always been able to say, well, just update what I changed, right?
right,
What's changed? You've always been able to say add or update your index. But what the graph database does is that allows you to keep that index with, even if you had to reboot your server or whatever, you keep that index and then now you don't have to rebuild it. if the server rebooted or the service restarted. And so by updating, so when you update that index versus have to completely rebuild it upon the restart.
Right.
I highly doubt they would allow you to hack into the index and
Just sometimes us old school programmers, that's where our mindset goes, right? So,
let's see here, see if I can connect. All right, so now I'm connected into the cluster, and what I can do is I can use this to pull slash there. Oh, still not there. The pod's not quite created. Once it's created, then I'll be able to start pulling the container. Takes about 10 minutes to
so maybe
download.
do a brief overview, for individuals who maybe aren't super used to Azure or Kubernetes or what's happening here. You just mentioned the word pod, maybe explain that a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, I'll try. Obviously, the Profisee engineers are the foremost experts on it, but what I've gleaned from it, and actually what I can do is let me pull that diagram back up. So when we look at these components, what Kubernetes creates is what's called a pod, and inside the pod is well, let me even go one step up. So you get what's called node clusters, and Profisee creates one node inside the node cluster for Windows. And that Windows node has a pod inside of it that will hold the Profisee image, right? So instead of your Windows server having a antivirus and this and this service and this other service and all these other services that are installed on it, what you end up getting is a Windows node that has a single pod that will contain a Profisee image and only a Profisee image. Now, I believe on the Windows node it has Defender, so it does have antivirus. I'm not entirely sure what Azure installs inside the node for the Windows, but there are some security for that node. Then inside the pod is only the Profisee container. That image has all of the Profisee services. So it has the workflow service, the core service that manages everything, the attachment service that manages anytime you attach a file to a record, it's managed that storage onto the file share. It has the authentication service, the service that connects to Purview. I'm sure now they've got an Azure, an OpenAI service. And so all of that is inside of the image that downloads into the pod.
Right. And is there a different installation style if you want multi-node implementation?
So multi-node is actually, you can't use the ARM template for multi-node.
Okay.
That is, so one thing that I should have prefaced this entire conversation with is that I highly recommend that you have a Kubernetes experienced resources that can manage Kubernetes and AKS inside of Azure and Azure experienced resources, because there are maintenance aspects of AKS that are required that aren't for the faint of heart, right? You need to make sure you upgrade your Kubernetes cluster environment, and make sure you are, um, maintaining your AKS environment. So a multi-node installation would look very similar to this diagram. It's just now what you're having to do inside of AKS is create another node here that will hold another pod for Profisee.
Right.
Slightly different because you can have multiple pods inside of a node. So if you actually look at, and we can look at it after it installs, but if you actually look at the node cluster inside of the AKS, you'll see that there's multiple pods that Profisee creates. It creates a pod to connect to your key vault. It creates all of the different networking pods. So there's several pods inside the node. And what you have to do for a multi-node is you have to create a brand new node for that second node of Profisee with the pod, with its own pod.
And then is the benefit of the multi-node that you can assign it to another region? That way, in case that the environments, one region might go down inside of Azure, then you have that automatically roll over, or is that not how the multi-node works?
I don't think that's the way the multi-node works, because so if you look at the dotted line around this,
Mm-hmm.
that virtual network lives in a region. So all the nodes would end up being in a single region.
That makes sense. So
The benefit of the multi-node is the same as if you had multi-node with your IaaS installation.
Right.
If this node, for whatever reason, fails, actually, I'm sorry. The multi-node, what this does is this allows you to run, let's say, matching processing on this node. And then on your second node, you can run your portal, you can run your address verification, other processes on your second node.
Right. And the benefit of that is, like, if you have a heavy data steward environment to where they are in it daily, moving stuff around, approving matches, so on and so forth, then any kind of regular processing won't hold them up or slow their performance down.
Yeah, especially when you look at doing real-time processing, and you need that speed to maintain in your matching engine. So now you're able to isolate your matching engine onto a single node, and then ensure that processing doesn't slow down from concurrent users on the portal or address verification or other processes like that.
Going back to my other question, and what have you experienced or what have you suggested if businesses, want to use multi-regions so they have that failover? I know Azure has their own, but we do live in a world where things do happen. So, and if companies are very, I'm thinking like a stock trading company or something like that, where they actually have to make sure that their stuff's always up and running, and they have to go across multi-regions. What have you suggested in the past there?
I've never had anyone ask for multi-region.
Okay, fair enough.
No.
Yeah, I haven't either, so that's why I was just kind of curious how that would, if it would be two completely different setups, or if it would actually, there would be a way to mirror that across. I'm sure on the Azure side there would be.
I don't know. I've never had anybody ask for multi-region because Azure, that would be a significant outage to have an entire region go out.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure that's a viable
Scenario. Yeah.
scenario. Let's see how we're doing here. There we go. So what we'll see here is what, and kind of going back to more of the detail on what is happening. Using the ARM template, what the ARM template does is first it will run a script to check your prerequisites. So make sure your license is valid, make sure your URL, is accurate, make sure, you have all of the correct information that you provided in your ARM template. Then it starts creating your SQL database, your storage account, your Kubernetes environment. And then after it gets your Kubernetes all built and it's got your SQL and it's got your storage account, then what's happening is it's running the main deployment script. And what that does is it has to go out and it gets the container image from the Profisee repository, the Azure repository. It downloads the image, which takes, I think it even said in the help documentation, takes about 10 minutes just to download the bits, the installation bits. So it gets all that down to the actual pod, and then it starts running the installation. The installation doesn't actually, it looks like it's pulling the image now. So it's actually pulling the image, and then after it pulls the image, then it'll start running the installation. This is a little bit concerning, the fact that I did get a warning that it wasn't able to find my secret. So we'll see if that causes an issue down the line. My secret is here. Well, not there, but here. Okay. It's enabled. See if that ends up causing us problems down the line here. We can see, I'll scroll up. See, it created the pod.
Mm-hmm.
And then pending status, container creating, all expected answers. Looks good. This license name, or this secret name, this is what Profisee calls the license, the secret internally. It's not what I named it. If I use a -F, it will automatically. Okay, which one is it? I thought it was. This is what. Oh, I'm still waiting to create. So once it creates the container, then okay. Pulling the image. So one thing we had talked about prior to the call starting was this idea of single source of truth compared to how it relates to MDM, the master data management. And you pointed me to this diagram, which I think is a great way to illustrate how this single source of truth concept, or this is where you would have Profisee in the middle,
right,
providing your single source of truth for your data, and then now Profisee is providing that data to each of your individual, your fulfillment areas, your any development needs that need data, your management, and any analytics areas that are looking for this single, true, accurate values, right, of data, representations of data.
Yeah, and I think that in my past, the word MDM or master data management and single source of truth have always been hand in hand. But I think over times, different companies or different environments, start trying to dissect them a little bit. But at the same time, I still think it all comes back to that system of record, single source of truth, and then how you're going to utilize that. MDM can live as the hub of your data warehouse, and some people will say it should, and other people will say, well, no, it's a spoke. So it's just it's interesting how MDM as a whole has transpired in over the years and the mindset, but it always comes down to, in my opinion, still that single source of the truth, and using it outside of just the MDM platform or the MDM database or whatever. So yeah, this definitely is a great diagram for that.
When I think about MDM or single source of truth, and you mentioned data warehouse,
Hmm.
I work. I've worked on several projects where companies are using this medallion architecture where they have a bronze zone, and then you migrate the data from bronze to silver, and then from silver to gold, and then your gold is your final your final clean data. And a lot of times we hear you talk about golden records and MDM.
Right.
And so I've worked with companies and they're like, oh, well, it's a golden record. So then Profisee, MDM, should feed the gold zone, right? And I've talked to and worked with several companies, and what we've done is we've actually taken the data out of Prophecy and fed into the silver medallion layer, right?
Right.
And that golden record, now your source of truth feeds into your silver zone. And what it does is it provides that single record that is your standard, your source of truth. And now that record is then combined with other data from other systems in the silver zone, which then feeds your golden zone.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's fine. And I've been part of those situations too, where financial well, finance will have certain set of reports, and they have their own data mart, and and all of that, and you have to build their data mart on a regular basis type of scenario. And then you have operations who they have their own data mart, and it starts looking very siloed, and that's fine as long as they all use that single source where they're getting building their silos off of. And I think where a lot of companies go astray is they build the silos and then they start layering on more and more data that hasn't been mastered or hasn't been utilized, or they say, well, this system of record needs this value, but this one doesn't. So we don't care that they're not centralized inside of MDM, but they should, and that's where I've seen a lot of companies start to dissect MDM to the point where they're really not doing MDM anymore, even though they say they have an MDM platform. And that's where you have to try to keep that all together and say, is this something that can be utilized across the entire business? Do you have a data governance plan over top of it? That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that should be the start, but for your MDM talks even start, So those are some of the things that I like to talk to customers about, and I like to, throw out there is that there's not a right way to do it. It's a way that works best for your business and how you want to utilize the data downstream. That's kind of my mantra anyway.
Yeah. Well, in a way, I think that calling Prophecy just an MDM is, in a way, boxing it in because it is a single source of truth
Right.
provider. It's not just master data management, not just about creating golden records. It's
Yep.
about creating a source of truth. And I even found this other uh, article about a single version of truth,
Right.
right? So you have a single source of truth, reference data, other data that's used by your silos, and then you also have your golden records, your version of truth. And
Yep.
and and that's why prophecy is more than just MDM. It is a, like we've been talking about, a single source of the truth. So
Right.
you're
And prophecy, I mean, I've used it many times as a system of record,
Mhm.
so there is that possibility to be able to do that too. And, that's where I think that it is a tool that kind of encompasses all of MDM. And also you can use it as that system of record, for your downstream silos as well. And it's very simple, and I haven't had any issues with it. I mean, of course, with everything, you scratch your head every once in a while, but there's experts like yourself that can help people through that, right?
Well, I've worked with a few different solutions that are not the traditional master data management. It's, we want to, as a organization, we want to create our items that we use to build our thing, right? We want to create our items inside of Prophecy and manage our items so that we have a single item for across the entire organization, right? Whereas your typical MDM is, well, I have an item in this ERP and this system and that system, and all these systems have their individual items, and I need to bring them into Prophecy and then have Prophecy say, this is my golden item, right?
Right. Yeah,
Well,
I think
the
the
solutions that I've dealt with is, well, we want Prophecy to create the item
right.
so that we have a single item and then tell everyone else this is your item.
Yeah, and I think I I've been in those situations, and you can make that work, definitely. The biggest thing that I spend, I think, more time talking to business about is getting them to understand the difference between a master data attribute versus a transactional attribute.
Mm.
A lot of business individuals really want that transactional attribute inside of their master data management, and it should never live there, and
Oh yeah.
it's just a holding space and causes more processing. And especially if you're in Azure or a PaaS environment, that now you have more data going in and out, and the cost becomes different versus on-prem. And I think definitely that's where I spend a lot of my time, is especially at the beginning of setting up entities or data domains inside of Prophecy, is having those conversations. Is what you truly consider master data versus transactional data. So,
Yeah, that's a big hurdle, is making sure you don't put transactional data inside of your master data hub.
right,
Yeah, and this is kind of what we've been talking about, is when you get to this centralized style of MDM, Prophecy is creating the record. You're creating the record out of Prophecy, and you're pushing that record out to your individual sources. And in this case, you don't, if you're creating the records inside of Prophecy, you don't necessarily you're not running matching, because you're not bringing in
right.
multiple source systems to run matching to create a golden record. You're creating the golden record out within Prophecy up front. And that's where Prophecy has the ability to do a lookup before create, right? So
Right.
you go in, you start to create the record, and Prophecy will tell you, well, this record already exists, you don't need to create it.
Yeah, most of the places that I have been, we've done the coexistence or the consolidated. The centralized, yes, it is something that I've been a part of,
Mhm.
but you have to remember that you have no other systems of records pulling into that data domain or that entity. So you definitely have to have that data steward layer who's doing data entry into straight into Profisee.
Mhm.
And a lot of businesses aren't willing to do that, and so that's where you have that coexistence where you're pulling from maybe a source of record that then becomes that single source of truth that gets pushed back out downstream. So, and then of course, Prophecy has a whole harmonization aspect too that you are able to push back down to the other environments or the systems of records too. So,
I think this is the biggest leap from coexistence to centralized. That's a huge leap for an organization because you have your data stewards, your folks that are working with the data. They're used to D365. They're in Salesforce
right,
all the time. They have those screens. They know how to work with that data. And so for Prophecy to work with this coexistence, all you need to do from an infrastructure side is to create a custom page in Salesforce, update your page, your Lightning page in Salesforce to call Prophecy using the REST API. It's
right,
that simple. So coexistence is a fairly simple um, integration perspective for Prophecy to do with, and you don't have that jump where, okay, now you're going to, data steward person, now you have to use Prophecy's portal. Now,
right,
given creating a portal in Prophecy is like that fast, I can
right.
create a page and a form and in an hour and have someone be able to work with their data directly in Prophecy. But it's that leap from this UI to this UI,
Right.
going from iPhone to Android or Android to
There you go.
iPhone. Let's see here. Started container. So created the container, starting the container. So let's take a look here. And then I should be able to run this because yeah, there we go. So since the container is started or created, what it's doing here is it's actually running the installation. So you can see it's doing all the configurations and looking for a should be. I'm expecting to see something about the license. Directory attempted copy. Config validating file repo, workflow, configuration flow. Configuring finished. So according to this, configuration is finished. Let's take a look. I don't think that link worked the way I expected it to work. It always takes longer to open the portal after
First time.
Prophecy first starts.
Yep.
100%. Log in. So if we were to look and see it, if we look back it says that was 20 minutes ago.
Right.
So what? 30 minutes from the time I started typing into the ARM template until I'm actually viewing the portal.
Yeah, I would say
Maybe
that's about right.
I mean, I've said 45 minutes a lot. I'll keep saying 45 minutes. But within an hour, easy, we were
Oh
able
yeah.
to spin up a Profisee PaaS environment. Now, what you need now currently, until they make it a web app, you have to have the Fast App Studio to configure Profisee. To get the Fast App Studio, all you need to do is go to API/client, click the version that you want to download, install that version. I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to bother installing it. And connect. I already have, this isn't the first time I've used this PaaS version, this PaaS installation. I already have the connection. So I click login. It will, it may or may not ask me to log in again since I'm already logged in. Already logged in, and I'm ready to create an entity. Within an hour, I can start configuring, developing inside of Profisee.
Yep. And I think that shows the benefit of having your document as well, because I know in my past experience and some of the installation issues I've had is because I didn't have everything ready. Or like I said at the beginning of this call, infrastructure wasn't involved or so on and so forth. And there's a certain way that companies have or want to set up their Kubernetes environment, so on and so forth. And so I think definitely having that all done in advance helps this installation process greatly. So
Oh yeah, and what you said about the infrastructure team not being prepared. So many times you get on a call and it's the first time the infrastructure team is exposed to anything that they have to do for a Profisee installation, and having those one or two pre-meetings to fill out this documentation, or even just sending this document to that team, really helps this installation go smoothly and quickly. So.
yeah. And what do you say to companies? This is where I always struggle too, where that once you have those infrastructure conversations, they try to say, well, then infrastructure needs to own the product. They need to own the environment and the upgrades. And then it's always that, well, then you need to learn Prophecy because there's a lot you need to know to keep the environments up and going. Do you suggest having that infrastructure person doing the training as well, or do you try to get that Prophecy professional to have the infrastructure experience? Where's your mindset there?
So I think there's two sides of that. So the actual Prophecy server, I think is an infrastructure owned product.
Okay.
The maintaining the upgrades, maintaining the AKS environment, maintaining SQL Server, that's that can be infrastructure, right? And separate from the actual configuration of Prophecy, because that's the server side. That is really um, getting the product to run. Whereas the configuration. So once you start going into Fast App Studio and configuring the environment, like creating entities and configuring matching strategies, that is your Profisee engineer. That's someone that needs to know needs to be trained in Profisee, needs to understand what it means for security and creating forms and portals and fast apps and things like that. That side of it needs that Profisee engineer. The one question I get a lot is companies that want separation of duties.
Right.
And so they want, well, I want someone to create a implementation package, a deployment package out of dev, and I want somebody else over here in the deployment team to do the deployment. Well, that's where, and I've worked with at a company where I was a deployment manager, and the deployment team, they had to know, I had to know Oracle, I had to know SQL, I had to know Sybase. The guys that did .NET, they had to know .NET, they had to know, all the different web-based applications. And it's the same situation with Profisee. Now, if you're going to ask a deployment team to do Profisee deployments, take a configuration from dev and put it in to test or prod. That team, whoever's going to do it, has to be trained and has to know how to work with the environment. It's not a point and click. It's not for the faint of heart to just do a deployment. Maybe that's
most of the time
maybe that's a good topic for another video.
It really would be, because most of those
deployment.
scenarios for me has always been, okay, we can do separation of duties, and then next thing I know, I get a call from the implementation person, and then they're giving me control of their machine. So, but yeah, no, that's definitely interesting, and yeah, would definitely be another topic. Now, now that we have this up and running here, is there one of the first things based off of your pod you set up, and the Windows node and the clusters and so on and so forth, is there something that you should set at the cluster server level right away, or do you talk about that later on? The number of clusters
Right.
at the admin level.
Yeah. So that's actually that's a good configuration point. So one thing that is critical is when you're running matching, and really it's just for the matching processing, is your core limit. And you have events and notifications and things like that. They don't take up a lot of core processing. However, your matching process does take a lot of cores. And what we always say is that the core limit should be 2 less than the number of cores assigned to the actual server. So my server that I put in here, I put, what did I put? 4? 2? 2. I think I put 2 cores. Yeah, I think I said 2 cores. Let's take a look. So one thing I can show you is this is the resource group that I had put that I wanted Profisee installed in. What Profisee will do is it puts the storage account there. It puts the SQL Server there by default. If I were to create these separately and have them in different resource groups, perfectly acceptable. In the ARM template, I would say, I already have a SQL Server. This is where it's at. I already have a storage account. This is where it's at. It creates some storage accounts for installation. These, I know this will go away after 24 hours. Don't kill me, Chuck. But it will go away. Same with these deployment scripts. They will go away after a while. Mm-hmm. And there's your SQL database. And here's your AKS cluster. In your AKS cluster, you will find your pods. So you can go to workloads and go to pods, and then you can say, show me the Profisee pods. So these are all the Profisee specific pods that Profisee uses. And if you look, there's a total of, well, I thought maybe it would tell me. All right, I'm not going to guess how many, but there's a bunch, right? If you want to see your nodes, you go to node pools, and then you can go to Windows node, and you can see that this is a 2019 server, and it's a D2, so it's a 2 cores. So I can't change this anymore. Right. But if I had 8, I could change this to 6.
Right. But I think the point that I wanted to make with that really is the fact that some companies think that if you just upgrade your cores, to try to get better performance, Profisee's not going to utilize them unless you tell it to utilize them.
That's true. So, yeah, and that's where that cluster servers is where you would set that configuration. So if we go back to the AKS cluster, you can see that we do have the 2 node pools, like I was talking about, and then inside the node pool is your node that has your Windows server with the node size. And then the other resource group that Profisee creates, this one has all of your AKS networking. That's required for AKS. I'm not an AKS expert, so I'm not even going to try and talk about public IPs and virtual networks and that kind of stuff.
Great.
Yeah, I think that was a success. It was less than an hour, obviously, for the installation, which was phenomenal. I still think that's just a super fast implementation for a master data management solution. And we might have a new content already. We're already talking about doing a deployment video, so that'd be fun.
Yeah, there you go. No, this has been very, very informative, I think, for the individuals who would be watching it. And I think it's always great to banter back and forth concepts with you, Mark. So I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. It was a lot of fun.